Hey everyone! One of the things I love about being a history teacher is that it makes you realize that history is everywhere. We can't get away from it. Even our names, our first names, and even our last names tell our story. They tell us who we are, so it's our personal history. Okay? Your name is going to say a lot of things about you. It's going to say where your ancestors came from. It's going to have a language of origin. Okay? Like my last name, Muchler, is German. You might have an English last name, or French, or Spanish, or Italian, or Greek, or Chinese, or Korean, or it might be from the Philippines, it might be from India, it might be from Arabia, it might be from Africa. That tells part of your story. But there's other things we can learn about what our last names tell us also. And so what we're going to focus on for the next few minutes is the origin of last names, where they come from, and what they mean. Okay, so I mentioned that my last name, Muchler, is German. And I had a professor in college who challenged the whole class to look up what does your last name mean. And I was kind of blown away by that. I didn't understand what he meant because I thought my last name was just a name. And of course then I figured out how wrong I was. Your last name is more than a name. Your last name is also a word. It came from somewhere. It has meaning. So I looked up my last name in German and I found out that it means the baker of small bread, this small German loaf of bread, and a Muchler is someone that makes that. And I found out there are all these different spellings of it, and it's the same story with your name. Your name came from somewhere, from some language, from some place of origin, and it has meaning. Okay? Sometimes our last names change. It's possible that you had an ancestor, maybe a grandparent, great-grandparent, great-great-grandparent. Maybe they changed your last name a little bit. Maybe they took out a couple letters, or they tried to Americanize it or something. So maybe they felt like your family would fit in a little bit better in America. That happens. Last names were also changed during immigration. So it was very common, especially in the late 1800s and early 1900s, for the U.S. Immigration Service, when immigrants would come in, sometimes their name would get changed. If they couldn't speak English very well, it was spelled incorrectly, or they would make it simpler for the American worker to spell, and so they would change the name. And a lot of times the immigrants wouldn't say anything because they were afraid that if they protested against this, it might wreck their chance of getting into America. So our names get lost, they get changed a little bit. Of course, probably the biggest example of this is people that were enslaved from Africa in the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s. They completely lost their old names. They lost their last names, and when they were brought to the New World, if they were given a last name, it was the name of their, the person that owned them, probably. So there's a whole bunch of names that are just lost forever. But what I want to really talk about today are certain types of names. Okay, so I've got some examples here, and just to make it simpler, we're just going to talk about English last names since we're all speaking English, and just to kind of keep it simple, we'll talk about that. So English last names. So some English last names, they actually came from like royal titles. Okay, royal titles. So King's a common last name. Prince, Duke, okay? Those are some, what else did I write here? Knight. Okay, those are some common last names that are either a royal title or a noble title that then just became like a surname, like a last name, okay? Here's another example. You've probably seen some of these. A lot of names, they're like son of this person, son of that person, okay? Like Johnson. Sometime long ago, someone was like, oh, I'm the son of John, and it became Johnson. Or Jackson, son of Jack. Or Williamson, son of William. And so on and so on, okay? So there are those types of English names. That happens in other languages as well, okay? But here is what I want you to think about. This is your challenge right now. And I'm going to give you about 3 or 4 minutes to do this. I want you to think about any last names that you can, any English last names that you can, that are also jobs. okay? What's a last name that's a pretty common last name that also is a job, a profession, a career that people do, okay? So first, let me give you some easy examples. These ones are pretty obvious. You're going to recognize these as fairly common last names that are also jobs, okay? So we've got things like Cook, okay? Cook's a last name, it's obviously also a job. Butcher, like our school, right? That's a common last name. Baker's a common last name. Farmer, okay? So these are things that became last names, but of course they're also jobs and professions. And so to kind of give you some more examples of this, I took a little field trip and I want to show you some other fairly common last names that it's not so obvious where they came from, but they actually are about a job. So please take a minute, watch this. This is a sawmill. Any town of any decent size would have had a sawmill in early America. The purpose of a sawmill, of course, is turning timber into lumber, and the person who runs a sawmill is a sawyer. A cooper. Someone who makes barrels. So this, of course, is a windmill, and in a time when so many people relied on farming, a mill like this was very important. The big arms, or like the fan blades, would be turned by the wind, and they would move giant grinding stones inside the structure, and it was important because this is where you would take your corn or your wheat, and it would grind it into cornmeal or flour. And the person who ran this was incredibly important, and the person who ran a windmill was a miller. A weaving shop is run by a weaver, someone who takes wool and weaves it into cloth. A wright is a type of maker or builder, kind of like the Wright brothers. This is a blacksmith shop.
This blacksmith shop was
someone who runs a blacksmith shop
in Gloucestershire, England. It was owned and operated by the Stanley family.
In fact, anyone who works with any kind of metal is a smith. Okay, so that's just some more examples of what are other last names that come from jobs, that come from professions. Here's your challenge. I want you to take about 3 or 4 minutes, and I want you to write down, make a list of as many other names, English last names, that you can think of that are also jobs, careers, professions, and so on. Because chances are, when that name began as a family line, it was because they had a relative that was a cook, that was a baker, that was a butcher, or something, and then it just got passed down by the name, or it got passed down through the family, right? So, take some time, take about 3 or 4 minutes, make a list. Besides all the examples I've already given you, what are some other last names that are also jobs? Okay? Good luck, and we'll see you in a few minutes.